Hello, everyone. Welcome to Design Journal number 17 for Cool Name RPG. This is the project where we're building a role-playing game from scratch. And when we say from scratch, we mean from scratch, from the very beginnings. And we're going to then give it away to the world for free so that everyone can play it and publish it however they like and use it for whatever they like. So let me go ahead and get started. As a design journal, I have a lot of things that I'm going to cover here today. But I'm going to start with just some news of the realm, so to speak, which is what I've been doing lately. So, first off, I've been showing you guys my mail calls lately because Lord knows there's all sorts of crazy things that show up in my mail. Here's my latest. Yes, this is the way. I'm not sure that these are coming into focus, but amazing. I love Star Wars toys. They're so great. So those came in the mail today. That was today's mail call. What am I reading right now? Stranger Things Choose Your Own Adventure, because that's awesome. You probably don't know, but this whole shelf is all Choose Your Own Adventure style books. Everything from fighting fantasy to Lone Wolf to Choose Your Own Adventure to Twist a Tale to every single thing you could possibly think of. The old Zork books. I got them all here. I love, love, love those books. Absolutely love those books. And probably most gamers do. Was basically getting a solo game in your hands when you're doing that, right? I've been watching Time Team, which there's a new episode out. Did you know about Time Team, right? First off, it's a reality show where they do archaeology in just 3 days, which is completely the most nerdy thing you could possibly imagine. Had like 21 seasons in the UK before it went off the air, but now they have a Patreon and they're making new episodes. So right now they're digging an Anglo-Saxon cemetery. Very, very, very cool. Great show. And they've got a Patreon, which is how they're making episodes now. So that's really awesome. You probably don't know, you know that we have a Patreon as well, right? Haven't been charging people. We've kind of been on a little bit of a pause, but we're planning to come out with a magazine. So just letting you know it's out there. We're not charging at the moment. And we're just basically building enough content where we can just have a steady stream. But yeah, just in case you didn't know that was out there, a little plug for us. So what are we playing here? First off, we're still playing our Warhammer Fantasy role-playing from Cubicle 7. Love Cubicle 7 games. They're really great quality. By the way, none of this is like advertisement. It's just me being nerdy about the fun things that I'm doing right now. Once we finish with Warhammer Fantasy role-playing, and next up, you probably saw last week, I posted this huge list of all the games we're planning to play. This is next up. Symbaroum, which I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, but from Free League. The main thing I can say about this is that it is gorgeous. It is just a gorgeous game. So I hope it plays as well as it looks, because if it does, it's going to be a ton of fun. And also, it's a starter set. I'm a sucker for box sets. Honestly, to any game publisher, if you want to trick me into buying something, just make it a box set, and I will not be able to resist it. And speaking of which, I saw this on sale. It weighs a ton, and I grabbed this as well. Zweihanda. So I love to over enunciate German names. And yeah, this looks very, very cool. Super cool looking game. Looking forward to playing with my friends and horrifying them all with some fantasy horror. So this should be fun. Anyway, that's what's going on here. Let's start talking this week. This week, weirdly enough, I have a rather unusual topic I'm going to talk about. First, I want to say hi to DBJ and the Michael Draper. Hey guys, glad you guys are watching tonight. It's always nice to have folks here with me when I'm doing this. Talking to myself is fine, but I do that all the time anyway. I don't need to do it live, but nice to have some folks around. So let's see. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the brain, but not that brain. Although that brain is awesome, and I loved Pinky and the Brain, one of my favorite shows. That's not the brain I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about this brain. And you might think, Mark, this is a stream about Design Journal for Cool Name RPG. Why on earth are you talking about the brain? Well, the reason for that, and I'll give you some more about that soon, the reason for it is that I have been struggling with attributes the last few weeks. That's been my challenge of life. There's been some great discussion on the Discord. As always, the Discord should be in the links to the description of this video. So if you aren't part of our Discord server, join up and jump into the conversation. lots of conversation. We thought we had attributes nailed down, but when we started to break it out, it ended up being a lot of attributes, like 12 attributes. And even when you broke them down into your smaller ones. Now, we did send to a bunch of our consulting designers the base mechanic and some information about the attributes that we were planning on using. But they're all pretty busy, is what I'm finding out. And we are waiting for some of the feedback. We heard back from Toya K. Finley, which was great. We heard back from Crystal Mazur, which was awesome. We got great feedback from them. But we have about 4 more folks we're waiting for feedback on, and they are just swamped at the moment. And it's holiday season, right? Here in the US, 4th of July is next week. Everyone's got stuff going on. So this is, as a design journal, one of the things that I'm learning is the struggle of getting people to find time to work on the things that I need them to work on. I mean, we are paying folks, but they still have a host of things. And I guess if we found people who, the part of the problem is that these are very busy people because they have a lot of stuff to work on, right? All of them do. And I can't thank Toya and Crystal enough for squeezing in some time for us. I really, really appreciated that. That's awesome. I also got to have a nice chat with Crystal. We had about a half-hour conversation where we talked through her comments, and more of that will be coming, but I'm waiting for that before I move forward too much more. But in the meantime, coming back to what I was talking about, I've been struggling with attributes. And so one of the things I started trying to figure out is what part of the brain does what for the human mind, because I always look for inspiration in reality. Whenever I'm designing anything, I think that finding your inspiration in reality is the best route you can go. If you just look at other things that were created that are similar, like other role-playing games, if you're creating a role-playing game, or if you're an artist, if you're only looking at comic book art to learn how to draw comic books, you're going to miss out on things. You're better off looking to life, looking to reality, and using that as a foundation for what you want to create. It doesn't mean you can't be inspired by those other things, but reality will always come through and have a richness that you won't otherwise get. So I dialed it back and started looking at the way things are put together. And one of the things that started all this was a conversation, partly a debate with myself, over this idea of agility and aim being conflated into a single attribute in games. Does it make sense that the same attribute that handles whether or not you can walk on a tightrope determines whether or not you can hit a target with a ball or a spear in the case of role-playing games? Does that make sense that that's the same attribute? I was never convinced that it was. However, I started doing research on the brain and the way the brain works, and I already knew some of this stuff, right? And trust me, my brain research is about the most shallow sort of research that you can do. It's the most baseline sort of learning. I'm not a brain expert. There are a million nuances to this that I'm going to completely ignore and probably get a number of things wrong. But the thing is that it gives me that foundation to work from, right? It's sort of like it's sort of like if you are an artist and you're looking at a tree to draw. That tree isn't the only way that trees can be. It's the same thing with this. I'm looking at just like one facet of all of this. So for those of you who are neurologists or experts on the human brain and the human body and physiology, you will please forgive me for my broad strokes that I use here. So let's see what I was talking about. I started digging into brain science and into where things come from in the body. And I started searching on things like what part of the brain handles deduction? What part of the brain handles alertness, awareness? What determines how strong a person is and how muscular they are? All of the things that come to mind when you're playing a role-playing game, right? So I started searching for all this. Excuse me here. It is smoky. I'm in Michigan, and I can literally see smoke from the Canadian wildfires right now. And so my throat is not at its best, and I apologize for that. So you'll forgive me if I stop to take a drink now and then as I'm going through this. Okay, better. So I started searching for all the things that come up in role-playing games and trying to learn how the human mind and body does these things: climbing, jumping, throwing, performance, lying. deduction, all of these different parts of the human mind. And this is where I started to dig into it. And let me show you some of the things I found. So, and again, this is very broad strokes. So this, don't take this to your science class, but this is enough for us to work with. I started looking, and for example, the pituitary gland influences muscle growth and bone. Genes and environment tend to influence how well we can resist or recover from illness, accidents, and other physical demands, which I found that pretty interesting, by the way, that genes and the environment that you grew up in basically determine how your constitution, right? As far as motor learning, coordination, movement, accuracy, they're all governed by the cerebellum. And I thought that was fascinating because that kind of undermines my whole, or answers my question of whether the same sort of part of the brain or body or attribute governs tightrope walking and acrobatics or throwing a ball, right? And then started looking at things like memory, thinking, learning, reasoning, problem solving. This is all coming from the cortex, right? Arts and creative thinking from the prefrontal cortex, also willpower, self-control, and determination are all from the prefrontal cortex. And the parietal lobe has compassion, your empathy, your altruism, wisdom, those sorts of things. And you have a limbic lobe for stress response, your fight or flight, your personality, right? That's where that's all coming from. And then the thalamus is influencing your alertness, your attention to sensory processing. So I think you can see where I was going with this. As I started to search for these things, they started falling into nice little groups, right? So I've got my first little group up here, the pituitary and genes and environment. Let me get out my laser pointer here, right? So I've got my pituitary, genes, and environment here, and the cerebellum. Down here, we've got all of our cortex-related behaviors and abilities. And then we get into some of the other areas down here. When you put all that together, it kind of starts to line up with attributes and the basic attributes that we're looking for in a game. Now, keep in mind that this is from a lot of massaging of the data and working with it and rethinking it and reorganizing it. It didn't just fall into these groups immediately. So there is a certain amount of trying to direct where all this is going, but it actually did very naturally fall into this sort of grouping here, right? It very naturally said, this is kind of all just one thing, right? We don't really need two attributes to handle all of that. And the creativity of the willpower, you start to look at this and you can do just about everything you want to do in a role-playing game with this, right? Presence, this is your intimidation, how much people look and see you walking into the room and get your attention. Empathy, sensing people's motive, working with animals, all of those sorts of things. It's all right there. It's sort of your wisdom and sense of truth, right? The sort of that underlying just knowledge of what is in the universe, your awareness. Of course, how often? I mean, half of the game is people making perception tests, it seems like sometimes, right? So, I mean, there's all these things going on here. And then, of course, up here are the obvious ones, strength and toughness and coordination. So I looked at all these, and all of a sudden they all started fitting together beautifully. And I went on from there. And now you realize that suddenly these all sort of fall very nicely into these ideas of body, mind, and spirit. Because we've talked all along about these high level attributes and the value of those high level attributes in the simplification of a game. So, for example, if you have a game that you want to keep relatively simple, you could just have strength, toughness, coordination, mind, and spirit, and you're done. Now, I think that you'd be doing a disservice because at that point you lose some of the inspiration to handle things in different ways, because when you're focused on physicality, people will play physicality. And so I think that there's probably a real value in having these things split out a little bit more, but you can keep it that simple if that's what you want. You could even keep it as simple as just body, mind, and spirit and go with that. And so that's one thing I really like, is I like this idea of I like the Russian doll of attributes and skills and things. I think that that's a really great way to set things up, because it gives people the opportunity to very quickly get into a game. But then once they've played it for a while, they can tweak it, right? Customize it. And I think that that's part of what is really fun for people who have been playing for a while, is this whole idea of tricking out your character, right? It's the way I like to think about it, right? You're getting in there like going, dude, my character, I once I've played him a few times, I really want to get in there and like customize him, man. I really want to make him like specialized in this area and this area I want to really come forward with, right? That's how he solves each of these problems. I really would love to see that. And so that's part of why I think that being able to split these things out is a great way to do it, because it lets you start simple, but then grow the character as you go along. Another thing that I'm looking at here is that I really like this idea that skills and actions and challenges aren't necessarily all overcome the same way. Okay. So you might try to overawe someone with your presence. Or if someone is lying and you want to know if they're lying, you might say, well, I'm going to use my intellect, Sherlock Holmes style, and deduce whether they're lying based on things like a twitch of their eyebrow or the way they keep looking to the left as they're talking, right? Another person might say, well, I have incredible empathy and I have a sense when something is off. And perhaps that will help me to figure out if they're lying. These sorts of things are ways that you can let characters grow into unique characters where not everyone is solving the same problem the same way. I think it's really important. Now, I'm going to take 1 second to take a look here. I'm getting some comments, and unfortunately, just to let you guys know, I do have a lag, right? So while I'm talking, it doesn't get to you guys to like a minute or two later. And so I've been trying to figure out how to get rid of that so it's more real time. But I apologize if sometimes I don't immediately get to the stuff that you're saying. Looking here, Daniel Struthers says, let me show you. Daniel says, I forgot to post my last week comment. I was wondering if presence would be a sub attribute of each of the other 3 attributes instead of being its own attribute. Well, as you can see, that's pretty much where I landed, right? As I broke this out, body, mind, presence, spirit, it kind of became this idea that presence really, we didn't need to break it out necessarily. It wasn't that important to have it separate. And it kind of got to the point where we were having attributes for the sake of having attributes. Some folks pointed this out. Now, I want to say right now that I'm not suggesting that what we built here is completely new and different, right? I'm not saying no one's ever thought of this before or this sort of a split. There were lots of ideas similar to this already on the Discord page, for example. But what I wanted to do was not just take our initial reactions, our normal responses at face value. I wanted to dig in and force some real thought about choosing these. And that's where I got into, the whole idea of brain function and body function. Because when you do that, we start to see that, yes, some of those ideas that are sort of instinctive to us as gamers now, because of our learning and our experience with the game, do line up in a nice way with the real world. And I think that gives us that sort of underlying reality that I talked about that's so important to a game like this. And by the way, we're going to have extra time tonight. So if you have something you want me to talk about, put it into the comments, because I would love to hear what you guys want to hear about as well, because, we'll have extra time. So as always, anytime you're here watching, be sure to jump in and just tell me what you want us to chat about, and we can sort of dig into it and talk about it some more. So, all right. So that's what I had to say about this. At this point, I don't have too much more to add, except that I kind of like this. I'm kind of curious what you guys all think. I'm going to ask the folks on Discord what they think about this grouping and these ideas, because I feel like we've got a pretty cool set of attributes here that give you some richness and different ways to solve problems, right? Great ways to solve problems. Let's see. Michael Draper was talking here and said intellect sensory powers doubles up awareness. Tighter to just have perception under awareness. Not quite sure. Oh, I see what you're saying. Sensory functions. Okay, so here's the thing. The idea of the sensory functions, the reason why it appears there and down below, there's 2 aspects to this. This is where I got into that sort of like mushiness where the brain like overlaps places. You have your awareness, which is your alertness and your ability to process the information that's coming in. But you also have just the general ability of those sensors, sensory abilities at all, right? So although that appears under intellect, that's only there because realistically it's there. Game wise, I probably wouldn't put it there, right? I'd probably yank that one out. In fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to pull this out right now. We're going to pull that off and just not have it there. Whoops. If I can actually control this computer and use it like a normal person. So here we go. There we go. It's gone. So I think that that's something that, yes, it was there because in reality, the prefrontal cortex does have a lot to do with how we process the sensory information that comes in. I do think that that's an example of where awareness might tell us that there's something there, where intellect might help us to figure out what it is, right? I think that that's sort of the difference in the two things. So, for example, awareness might tell you that that there's something going wrong. You have a sense of danger. You have there's something not right in the room, but then you'd have to figure it out with your intellect. Just one way we could think about it. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. The main reason I don't know why I don't like perception as a word. For some reason, perception sort of I don't know. I think it's because it's very active, right? Because you perceive things, you're actively perceiving things. I like the fact that awareness is sort of like always on. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know if that's something that anyone else feels, but that's why I used awareness there as opposed to perception. Um, Also means that we don't have two P words, but that's just me being silly at this point. Um, yeah, and one thing I'm curious about too is what focusing about is creativity, right? So there never seems to be a creativity ability in games. I think that that's kind of unfortunate because not everyone, even if you're playing a role playing game, is necessarily a super creative person. But you might want to play a really creative character, right? So it'd be kind of nice to be able to represent that, right? I mean, part of why you like playing characters, you get to play someone who maybe is cooler than you are, right? In real life. I mean, when I play a super smart, like logical, genius wizard with eidetic memory, I'm like, that's awesome for me. But I don't have any of those things, right? But it's awesome to play it if we have a high intellect character. Same with creativity. Some people might not be a natural artist, but they might want to be able to play one. So I like that there, but I'm just not sure what other folks think about that. In the game, the places where I would see that coming into play is that I see creativity coming into play in that if you had to try to solve a problem and you didn't know how to solve it, the GM might have you make a creativity roll to see if you can find a way out that you wouldn't otherwise find, something different. Maybe there's tools around that the GM has placed there and that no one is quite figuring out why they're there. And the GM might say, well, make a creativity roll. And the person does that and they look around and suddenly they think, the GM says, look, you look around, there's boards there, there's a big rock there that you could use and some spikes over there. You could probably hammer those spikes into that board and create a barrier. And all of a sudden, the players might go, we didn't even think of that, but their characters would because they're very creative, right? Now, Michael Draper made a point that creativity tends to devolve into performance. But one thing I will say about that is that I kind of feel like presence and creativity work together. In a lot of cases, abilities, I think, work together. Creativity and presence would be performance, where presence is sort of how you hold yourself, how you present yourself, how you put yourself forward to people, where your creativity is, coming up with a lie. And, again, it's different ways to do it, right? That's kind of what I keep thinking about is that creativity might be just like deadpanly saying a lie that people are like, well, I believe it. Whereas presence might be being so charming and convincing that the person goes, yeah, it's probably true, right? I don't know. But yeah, I think we're going to need to talk about it some more. Lirana, who I'm sure I'm pronouncing your name wrong again, just said creativity feels like it covers wisdom, but just a different way to think about it. And it kind of does. I mean, we do have willpower, which is a little different, and we don't really have a wisdom per se. Empathy comes into play with wisdom a little bit. But again, I do want us to think about this some more, think about how this might play out, just because I will say I've always wanted to see a creativity attribute in a game before, right? And then, great. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Here, let me put this out here. They absolutely nailed it. Creative people might write the play, but the actors need presence to sell the role, right? That's it. That's exactly it. Lirona, she, her, thank you for giving me your pronouns because I apologize. At first, I was like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing here." So, Lerona, thank you. Yes. So creative people might write the play, but the actors need presence to sell their role. That's exactly it. I love that concept. I love this idea that, you can have those two different aspects at work within the game. And in general, I will admit that I'm a person who likes a couple of roles to get to where you want to go. The idea being that, for example, one of the things that I tend to do is have a difference between finding tracks and following tracks, or finding tracks and identifying tracks, right? I can look around and find some tracks in the dirt because I'm perceptive, right? I have a great awareness, but I don't necessarily have the knowledge to tell you what the heck those tracks are, or really to try to like follow them. I mean, maybe I can, but I'm not going to then know what that broken branch means because I don't have tracking, but I can find the tracks. I always like this concept that in a game, there are these two steps to doing something like that, right? And I think that creativity and presence is an example of that. For example, if I was playing a bard, you'd probably want both. You'd want to be creative and you'd also want excellent presence. If I was a con artist, again, probably good to have both, but I might be able to get away with like intellect and presence, right? Doug Kilmer said that creativity could also be out of the box problem solving. Exactly. Finding those ways around a thing and allowing people to come up with those solutions, right? And then also you could also double say intellect, deductive reasoning, right? Again, finding different ways for each character to overcome the same challenge. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but you'll probably remember back when I talked about the superhero concept and how when they climb a wall, the Avengers don't all roll a climb roll. They each roll something different to climb the wall, right? Hawkeye's going to roll a archery roll to fire a arrow with a rope on the end of it so that he can then ascend with the rope. And then the Hulk is just going to make a leaping roll, jumping roll to jump to the top. And Captain America is one of the only guys who's actually going to make a climbing or athletics roll to climb up. The Scarlet Witch is going to use magic. In every case, they're doing different things to get to the same place. And again, I like this idea and I love giving people that choice. And I think it's important that mind and spirit exist in a rich way so that people will understand that that's an option, that all the options aren't just in those first three stats. Retconning flashbacks may give less inventive players ways to play creative characters. I love that, right? You could say, yeah, I was creative and I predicted this might happen. So in advance, I came up with this idea and now I can use it. Awesome. I love that idea. There's got to be a way. Thanks, Michael Draper. That's a great idea. So all very, very cool things that we can do with this. We are now at the 8:30 time. I'm going to start wrapping things up here because we've gotten through the core stuff that I wanted to get through, but I am not here next week. I'm going to be gone all next week. I'm going on a trip with my family, so I won't be around next week. However, I will be back the week after. And while I'm on the trip, I am bringing my laptop because my goal is to finish our first playtest document. I know I'm still waiting for feedback from our designers, but I don't want to keep waiting, right? I want to keep moving forward. I may have to make changes after that, but I will absolutely be working on that. And I'm hoping I can finish it while I'm gone. So wish me luck, folks. I'm going to need it. That's it for tonight. Thank you all for being here. It was great having you folks here. Great to talk to everyone. Great ideas all around. And hopefully I'll see you soon. In the meantime, I'll be out for the next week. I'm going to do a post on the Kickstarter and an email to our email group, but then I will be back the week after. So good adventures to all of you.